So the speech that he gave yesterday, not to diminish any threats contained therein, but it's stuff that we've heard before, and his quote was real weird. It is incredibly weird. He completely got it wrong. The quote, and then he also was saying that you can't own a tank, which you can. You can own a tank. We've been over this before too. I also felt like, do we have the? I'm pulling this up here. Do we have the soundbite where he was saying that you don't have a jet either, which I thought was it was another really weird audio soundbite from him, because he's said this kind of before, which almost sounds like the government's threatening to murk you, and he had said that he's talking about jets. And he said that, well, audio soundbite too. He mentioned apparently that F-15s are constitutionally protected. Listen.
By the way, if they want to think to take on government if we get out of line, which they're talking again about, well, guess what? They need F-15s. They don't need a rifle.
Now, see, so a couple of things here. We're going to get to the F-15 thing in a moment. Everybody kind of skipped over the first part of his sentence. Can you play that one more time? Just listen to the first part of his sentence. Listen to just the first part.
By the way, if they want to think to take on government if we get out of line, which they're talking again about.
See, if they want to take on government, if we get out of line, which is what they're talking about. So before we get to the F-15 part, let's stop there because everybody kind of ran right over that. First off, that part was incredibly concerning. There's an unpopular. Well, not unpopular. I don't even know why it's controversial, considering the way this country was founded. We have a bunch of pseudo badasses in the United States that think that they're so tough, but they don't realize the purpose of the Second Amendment. It doesn't have anything to do with you defending yourself against a rapist coming into your home. Yeah, you can defend yourself. It covers that. But do you realize the real reason that we have it? The real impetus for creating that with the founders. Let's go back in time. Let's go back to the Revolution, which predates the War of Independence. The Revolution was the Stamp Act. It was everything else. It was a bunch of fed-up colonists who had exorbitant taxation, similar to what we have now, placed upon their shoulders, and all their monies were sent over to England and the king over there. And we had no representation in matters that were designed to govern our everyday lives. We had no representation at all. And when we entered into the War of Independence and when we fought a bloody battle for our independence from the crown, we came from years of quartering soldiers. We came from years of redcoats in the streets. We came from years of living under threat of penalty, enforcements carried out by military. That's what we lived in threat of. And our founders were very, very purposeful in terms of how they shaped our founding documents, how they based it on a republic, not a direct democracy. They didn't incorporate we had parliamentary measures and we had democratic processes that were used in the republic. They were so smart in how they created this government. And they were such students of the Roman governments and of the Greeks and everything else. And they were so smart, and they took the best things from some of the best things and they used it to make the best thing. And so they were coming into the creation of a new sovereign entity that was to be by the people, for the people. And you can't have an entity that's by the people and for the people if it's an entity that has, a military ruling class. And they wanted to get away from that. They didn't want a monarchy. They didn't want a monarchist republic or monarchy and having a monarch and a parliament. They didn't want any of that. They wanted a republic in which the people represented themselves, and that they had to be virtuous and educated, which we're losing both of those. They had to be virtuous and educated so that the common man could represent himself, and that there was no aristocracy and there wasn't anything like that. Everyone was capable of doing the job, and it was a service, not just to one's own family, but to one's neighbor. And when they created this and they incorporated the Second Amendment, going through the history, and I've written some books on this, so I'm pretty well versed in the history. again, they did not want to fear the people that had the guns. They wanted to have guns. They wanted to be able to protect themselves from anyone who tried to force tyranny upon them again. That's why George Mason said, when they were debating this and when he was writing letters back and forth, he had remarked that the militia is the whole of the people, every American man and woman. There is no separate, and everybody is part of that. Everyone has as a responsibility the cause of freedom. It's not just for some. It's not to be outsourced. It is a shared responsibility and privilege. That's how it was viewed. They did not ever want to live under the tyranny of redcoats and a crown that didn't represent them but was happy to take their money. So when you look at the history of this, and for the people who say, well, they said well-regulated militia, look back at the parlance of the time, you absolute illiterates. I get really upset at the illiteracy rate of this country. Well-regulated meant you could keep yourself well. Actually, it was a phrase, and a friend of mine pointed this out. I mean, I was a fan of Jane Austen. Of course, every girl was back in college. There's a phrase she used like repeatedly. That was a popular phrase to use, almost cliche. Oh, well-regulated, meaning they were able to take care of themselves. Talking about a well-regulated militia, you're talking about every man and woman who is capable not only of shooting, not only of carrying their firearm, but servicing it, cleaning it as well. That's what was meant at the time. And of course, anyone who ever paid attention to anything that the founders ever wrote to themselves or to each other, the debates, or paid attention to the Federalist Papers at all whatsoever, this doesn't need explaining to you because you're educated. So when he says if they want to think to take on the government if we get it out of line, that's the entire purpose of the Second Amendment, is to take on the government if you get out of line. Self-defense is covered. But the government is never to think that they have more power than the people, because the government's power is derived from the consent of the people. And that is manifest by way of a vote. And people who ignore this are often tyrants. So he has no concept of how America works. I've met people who have immigrated into this country who have more of a knowledge and an appreciation for America than people like Joe Biden who were born here. That tells you. So that's what the purpose of the Second Amendment is. It scares the hell out of the left when you mention this, because they don't like to be reminded that there are limitations to their tyrannical goals. It can only go so far. The people have rights. The people are required. That's why Thomas Jefferson said what he said. But he said it wasn't just the blood of tyrants, it's the blood of patriots, because there's a cost to it. And it's a cost that should only be paid when there is no other option. And the people who've never felt such heat and have never been around anyone who's even paid such a cost, they're always the most eager to Leroy Jenkins right the hell into it. But then Biden, in that same sentence, and this soundbite, go ahead and play it again, because this soundbite was just amazing to me. Go ahead so we can hear the full sentence now.
By the way, if they want to think to take on government if we get out of line, which they're talking again about, well, guess what? They need F-15s. They don't need a rifle.
So maybe it's just me, but I immediately interpreted that as, oh, so F-15s are also constitutionally protected. Great. I'm going to go and build a garage now to house my giant F-15. I mean, you know, I'll now just, but if anyone gives me problems, it identifies as a drone.
No, that's right. I was going to go to the F-35. I don't know if that program's so great for the United States, but I think that's a vertical takeoff.
Oh, that's actually a really good point.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, you don't need all of the. Yeah, you don't need all the
runway
acreage
and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, making a note.
It's just a drone.
Vertical. That's making a note. So when my second thought after I saw that was laughs in Viet Cong or laughs in Mujahideen. I mean, you go back to, this was in the 80s, so I wasn't, historically I can go back and read about what ultimately became the Taliban, members of some of the northern Afghanistan fighters that ended up becoming the Taliban. What did they just have, Kane? Well, they had some rockets and some other incendiary devices, but what do they have? Just guns, rifles.
Yep. That's how they do it.
Viet Cong had what?
Oh, yeah. That's all they had, too.
Yeah.
Guns.
Yeah.
That's all you need,
That's all
apparently.
you need. That's really all you need. And then my third thought was, wait, so you're saying that if rifles aren't enough to take over the government, so what is your big opposition to rifles?
Thank you.
This was such a stupid sentence that he said. I mean, I could do an entire class on this, his sentence, but I'm not even done with that because we have some other stupid sentences to share with you. And here's one other quick note, and I always add this as a caveat. You do not have to be a huge Second Amendment advocate. You don't even have to own a gun to appreciate what I'm telling you here. Because a tyrannical government, if you think that they were only going to stop at disarmament, then you've not been a student of history. In fact, there is no exception in the entire history of humanity where tyrants have only made it to where the people cannot defend themselves and then they've stopped there. That has never happened in the history of humankind. So that's why you need to pay attention to this, even if it's just about guns.